I still remember that morning like it happened just yesterday. My name is Eliav Ben David, a simple carpenter from a quiet town in northern Israel. I never imagined that my voice would one day be used to share a story this powerful, a story that proves that when doctors give up, God is just getting started. For 14 years, my wife and I watched our only son, Noam, grow up with a weak kidney that made every single day a battle. Hospitals became our second home. Machines, injections, and endless pain, that was our life. But one unexpected guest changed everything. And today, as I tell you this story, I want you to know something, my brothers and sisters, no situation is too far gone for God. Please, if you're listening, share this testimony with someone who needs hope. Like and subscribe so more people can hear how God still heals in mysterious ways. From the day Noam turned 6, we knew something wasn't right. He was smaller than other children, his skin pale, and his eyes always looked tired. At first, we thought it was just the long summer heat. But then he started fainting during play. The doctors ran several tests, and I still remember the day the results came out. The room smelled of disinfectant and sadness. The doctor couldn't even look me in the eye when he said, "Your son's kidney is failing. He might not live to see 18. My wife broke down. I tried to stay strong, but inside, I was dying too. For years, we did everything, medicines, dialysis, traveling from one hospital to another, praying at the Wailing Wall every Sabbath. I even sold my old shop to pay for treatments. I didn't care about money anymore, all I wanted was to keep my boy alive. But by the time he turned 14, his condition had worsened. He could hardly walk anymore. He barely spoke. I would sit by his bed at night, holding his hand, whispering, "Son, please don't leave me. Please hold on." Sometimes I caught him smiling faintly, saying, "Abba, don't cry. Maybe God will come for me soon." That broke me every time. I didn't want him to meet God in heaven, I wanted God to meet him here. Then one afternoon, when all hope seemed gone, something happened. A man came to our town. We didn't know him. Nobody did. But everyone said he was sent from God. He wasn't loud. He didn't look rich or powerful. He just walked around, visiting homes, blessing people, praying for the sick. And when he stepped into our home, I felt something strange. The air changed. It was calm but full of life. He looked at my son, smiled, and said, "Can I sit beside him?" I nodded, tears already falling before he even prayed. He placed his hand on Noam's forehead and whispered something, not in Hebrew, not in English. But whatever it was, I felt peace cover the whole room. Then he looked at me and said softly, "Eliav, your son will not die. He will live." And just like that, he left. No long sermon. No offering. Nothing. Just those words. That night, something unexplainable began to happen. That night, I couldn't sleep. The man's words kept echoing in my head like a soft drumbeat. "Your son will not die. He will live." I sat by Noam's bedside, staring at his frail body under the thin blanket. His breathing was shallow, and his face looked almost transparent under the dim lamplight. My wife, Leah, had fallen asleep on the chair beside me, her head resting on her folded arms, worn out from months of exhaustion and prayer. I wanted to believe. I really did. But after years of disappointment, faith becomes something you hold with trembling hands. I whispered a quiet prayer, not with fancy words, just a broken heart. "God of Abraham, if you're still there, please prove it tonight." Around midnight, I heard something. It wasn't thunder, nor was it the wind. It was music. Soft, distant, like a choir humming through the air. I thought I was imagining it until Leah woke up suddenly, looking around. "Eliav, do you hear that?" she whispered. Before I could answer, Noam's fingers twitched. Then his lips moved, and he started whispering in his sleep, "Abba. Abba, they're singing." I froze. "Who's singing, son?" I asked, leaning closer. He smiled faintly and said, "The men in white. They're standing by the window." Leah gasped and covered her mouth. I turned toward the window, but all I could see was the night sky and the faint outline of the olive trees swaying in the breeze. Yet, somehow, I felt them too. The air felt thick, alive, filled with something holy. Noam's breathing became steady for the first time in weeks. He slept peacefully until morning, no pain, no restless gasps, no crying for water. When the first light of dawn broke, I touched his forehead. It was cool. The swelling around his stomach had gone down slightly. I shook Leah awake, and when she saw it, tears rolled down her cheeks. "Eliav, something's happening," she whispered. I didn't want to get my hopes up, but my heart was already racing. I went to the well outside, fetched water, and brought it to him. For months, he could barely sip anything. But this time, he drank it all, slowly, quietly, and then looked at me and said, "Abba, I'm hungry." I can't describe what that did to me. I broke down right there beside the bed, thanking God, thanking the heavens, thanking the man I didn't even know. Leah cooked porridge immediately, and for the first time in so long, the smell of food filled our home, not medicine or disinfectant, but real food. That evening, neighbors came to visit, curious about the change they saw through the window. One of them, Miriam, asked, "Eliav, did you finally get new medicine from Haifa?" I smiled and said, "No. Heaven sent a visitor instead." She laughed softly, thinking I was joking. But I wasn't. Something had shifted, not just in Noam's body, but in our lives. And that was only the beginning. Because the next night, a new sign appeared, one that would make the whole town whisper for days. I'll never forget that Sunday afternoon. The air was still, the sun hung low over our small town in Israel, and the streets were almost empty because most people were indoors avoiding the heat. I was sitting outside our small house, lost in thought as I watched Daniel trying to draw under the shade. His body was so frail that even holding a pencil seemed to take effort. Every few minutes, he would stop, press his hand to his side, and breathe slowly. My heart broke a little more each time. Then I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was our neighbor coming by to chat. But when I looked up, I saw a tall man walking down the dusty road. He wasn't dressed like anyone from our town. His clothes were simple, but clean. He carried no bag, no phone, no companion, just a small Bible in his hand. His eyes were calm, and there was something peaceful about his face. He smiled when our eyes met. "Shalom," he said softly. "Shalom," I replied, uncertain but respectful. Travelers were rare here, especially those walking alone. He asked for water, and of course, I invited him in. My wife brought him a cup and some bread, and he thanked us warmly. He said he was visiting several small towns to share the word of God. I didn't think much of it, we often had ministers passing through. But there was something different about this man, a quiet strength, a calm that filled the room. As he ate, Daniel came out slowly and sat near the door. The man looked at him for a moment, not with pity, but with deep concern. "Is that your son?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my voice low. "His name is Daniel. He's been very sick since birth. His kidney is failing. We're doing what we can." The man's eyes softened. "I see," he whispered. Then, after a long pause, he said, "May I pray for him?" I looked at my wife. We hesitated. Many people had prayed for Daniel before, friends, relatives, even pastors. Nothing had changed. But there was something in this stranger's voice, something that made it impossible to say no. We nodded. He stood up, walked slowly toward Daniel, and placed his hand gently on his shoulder. "Young one," he said, "you are loved by God. He knows your pain. He sees your tears. And today, he will show you his mercy. I didn't know what to expect. The man closed his eyes and began to pray in a voice that sounded both powerful and peaceful. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was calm, filled with faith. I could feel something shift in the air. It was as if the room had become lighter. My wife's eyes welled up with tears, and even I felt something stir deep in my chest, a hope I hadn't felt in years. When he finished, Daniel looked up and said softly, "Father, I feel warm inside." We all froze. The man smiled, placed his hand on Daniel's head, and said, "God's hand is upon him. Believe, and you will see." Then he sat back down, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. I didn't know it yet, but that prayer would mark the beginning of a miracle that would change our lives forever. That night was unlike any other night in my life. After the stranger left, our house felt different. It's hard to explain. The air felt lighter, as if the walls themselves had taken a deep breath. My wife, Miriam, kept glancing at Daniel, as though she was expecting something to happen. But at the same time, both of us were afraid to hope too much. We had believed before, and we had been disappointed too many times. We sat together quietly that evening, eating in silence. Daniel, however, didn't want to eat. He said he felt a strange warmth spreading through his body, not a feverish one, but something that made him restless. I thought maybe it was just the heat of the day or his nerves reacting to the visitor's prayer. But then, as midnight approached, I heard a faint sound from Daniel's room. At first, I thought he was having another one of his painful episodes. Those used to happen often, nights where he would cry silently, clutching his side, trying not to wake us up. My heart raced as I rushed into his room. He was sitting upright in bed, breathing hard. Beads of sweat ran down his forehead, but his eyes looked different. They were wide open, almost glowing with life. "Daniel, what's wrong?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. He looked at me and said something I'll never forget, "Father, I can feel something moving inside me." My heart stopped. Moving? What do you mean, moving? I don't know, he whispered, pressing his hand to his stomach. It's like, something is fixing itself. I don't feel the pain anymore. It's gone. I didn't know what to say. For years, pain had been part of his everyday, the sharp, stabbing ache in his side that made him cry in his sleep. I placed my hand on his side, and for the first time, his body wasn't hot with pain. It was normal. Calm. Miriam came running in. When she saw Daniel sitting upright, smiling, she gasped. "What's happening?" she cried. "He says he feels no pain," I told her. She fell to her knees beside the bed and began to weep. I could feel my own eyes burning. We didn't understand what was happening, but deep down, I knew, something had shifted. Something divine. That night, none of us could sleep. Daniel was full of energy, talking and laughing more than he had in months. He said he felt light, as if something heavy had been lifted off him. Miriam kept touching his face, crying and praying under her breath. By dawn, we sat together on the porch, watching the sunrise. The golden light spread across the sky, and Daniel leaned against my shoulder. He hadn't done that in years, not without wincing in pain. "Father," he said softly, "do you think I'm healed?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe it with all my heart. But fear still lingered, fear that it was temporary, that the pain would return. I looked at him, smiled gently, and said, "If God has started something, he will finish it." He nodded, smiling. "The man said God's hand is upon me," he whispered. I didn't reply. I was lost in thought, remembering the stranger's calm eyes and the way his prayer filled the house with peace. He hadn't asked for money, hadn't tried to impress us. He just prayed, and left. I didn't even know his name. That morning, I made up my mind. I was going to find that man again. I needed to see him, to thank him, to tell him what had happened. Because deep down, I knew, our lives had just witnessed something holy. The next morning, as the sun rose over the dusty hills of our town, I made a decision that felt almost sacred. I would find that man, the one who prayed for Daniel. I didn't know where he came from, or what his name was, but something in me refused to sit still. Before I left, I turned to Miriam. "I have to find him," I said quietly. "We must thank him. We must tell him what God has done." She nodded, though her eyes were full of tears. "Go, Eli," she said. "But be careful. He may not even be in this town anymore." Daniel was still asleep then, peacefully, without any sign of pain. I stood at his doorway for a long moment, watching his chest rise and fall. For the first time in years, I felt peace in my heart. And yet, curiosity burned inside me. I left home as the marketplace began to stir. Merchants were setting up their stalls, the smell of spices and fresh bread filled the air, and children chased each other down the narrow paths. But I wasn't seeing any of it clearly. My eyes searched every face, every stranger passing by, hoping to find that man in white. I asked around, the bakery owner, the water seller, even the shepherds who came down from the hills. Some said they had seen a preacher walking through town 2 days earlier, praying for the sick and blessing homes. Others said he had gone toward the next village. I followed every lead, walking for miles under the hot sun. My sandals grew dusty, and my throat felt dry, but I didn't stop. Something urged me forward. By midday, I reached the edge of the next town, a small cluster of houses surrounded by olive trees. I stopped at a well to drink, and an old woman there looked at me curiously. "You look tired, traveler," she said. "Where are you headed?" "I'm looking for a preacher," I replied. "A man who came through our town yesterday. He prayed for my sick son." Her eyes brightened. "Ah, yes. The man in white," she said softly. "He came here too. He prayed for my granddaughter. She had been unable to walk for months. Yesterday, she took her first steps again." I froze. My heart began to race. "Where is he now?" I asked. She shook her head. "He left early this morning. Said his work here was done. He was heading toward the river valley." I thanked her and continued my journey, but deep down, I already knew, I wouldn't find him. He wasn't an ordinary preacher. He appeared where God sent him, and left just as quietly. By evening, I stood by the riverbank, staring at the water shimmering under the fading sun. I was tired, but a strange peace washed over me. Maybe I didn't need to find him after all. Maybe his purpose wasn't to stay, it was to deliver a miracle and move on. As I turned to walk home, a soft breeze passed by, carrying with it the faint scent of frankincense, the same smell that had filled our home the night he prayed for Daniel. I stopped and closed my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered into the wind. "Whoever you are, wherever you are, thank you." When I returned home that night, Daniel ran to the door to meet me. His steps were quick and strong. He hugged me tightly and said, "Father, I feel new." I looked at him, at his healthy face, his bright eyes, and all the exhaustion of the day vanished. I realized that maybe the stranger's identity didn't matter. What mattered was what God had done through him. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, who was he really? A man? A messenger? Or perhaps, an angel in disguise? When Daniel woke up the next morning, he was full of energy. I could hardly believe my eyes. My son, who just days ago could barely stand without clutching his side in pain, was now helping his mother fetch water from the well. He laughed as he walked. He laughed, something I hadn't heard in months. His laughter echoed through the courtyard like music, pure and free. Miriam and I just stood there watching, speechless. But even with joy filling my heart, a small part of me hesitated to believe. What if it was temporary? What if the sickness returned? I needed proof, solid proof. So I said to Miriam, we're taking Daniel to the city tomorrow. We'll see the doctors again. I want them to tell us what I already know, that our son is healed. She agreed, though her eyes filled with emotion. Yes, Eli, she said softly. Let them see what God has done. The next morning, we set out early. The sun was still low when we boarded a small bus that rattled along the old highway leading into the city. Daniel sat by the window, smiling, pointing at everything he saw, the fields, the goats, the fruit sellers by the roadside. It felt like a dream. When we arrived at the hospital, some of the nurses recognized us immediately. They looked at Daniel in shock. One of them whispered to another, "Is that really the same boy? The one who was so sick?" We were ushered into the office of Dr. Rahim, the same man who had diagnosed Daniel months earlier. He adjusted his glasses, looking confused as we entered. "Eli. Miriam, what brings you here today?" he asked. I smiled and said, "Doctor, we just want you to see him. My son." The doctor looked at Daniel carefully, then blinked. "He looks, well." "He is well," I said. "Completely." Dr. Rahim frowned slightly. "Sit down, Daniel. Let's run a few tests." He called for the nurse, and they took Daniel into the next room for scans and blood work. I could feel my hands trembling as we waited. Miriam held my arm tightly. Minutes turned to hours, and finally, the doctor returned, holding the results in his hand. He looked at us, his face pale with disbelief. "Eli," he said slowly. "I don't understand this." "What do you mean?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "Your son's kidneys are perfect. There's no damage. No sign of the disease. It's as if he never had it." Miriam gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Tears filled her eyes instantly. I could barely breathe. The doctor sat down, shaking his head. "This isn't possible. We've done every test. I saw his scans myself last month, his kidneys were failing. But now they are completely new." I smiled through tears. "Doctor," I said quietly, "you're right. It's not possible, not by man's power. But with God, all things are possible." He stared at me for a long time, then whispered, "I don't know what to say." I told him the whole story, how the stranger came, how he prayed, how Daniel woke up healed. The doctor listened in silence, then said softly, "Whoever that man was, he must have been sent from heaven." When we walked out of the hospital that day, I looked up at the sky. The clouds moved slowly, golden with sunlight. And I felt a warmth deep in my soul, the kind that only comes when you know God has truly touched your life. Daniel ran ahead of us, waving at the guards by the gate. Miriam laughed and wiped her tears. For the first time in years, the weight that sat on our hearts was gone. God had done what no doctor could do. He had restored not just Daniel's health, but our faith, our hope, and our joy. When we returned home from the hospital, the entire neighborhood seemed to notice the change in Daniel immediately. Children who used to whisper about his sickness now ran to him, shouting his name. "Daniel! You're back," they cried, circling him as he laughed and played in the street. Miriam stood at the doorway, watching with tears of joy. I couldn't help but smile either. It was as though the whole street had come alive again. After months of silence and worry, now there was laughter, music, and joy. By evening, the story had already begun to spread. A few of our neighbors came over, asking questions. "Eli, how did it happen? Was it medicine? Who treated him?" I told them everything, from the moment the stranger entered our town to the day we saw the doctor's results. I didn't add or remove anything, just the truth. "It wasn't a medicine," I said simply. "It was a miracle. A man came to our town and prayed for Daniel. I don't know his name, but I know he came from God." They looked at me like they were seeing something beyond what they could understand. Some of them nodded slowly, others looked away, still trying to make sense of it all. The next morning, a man from a nearby town came to visit. He said he'd heard the story from a friend. "I have a sick child too," he said. "Can you pray for him? I heard your son was healed by prayer." I was shocked. Me? I'm not a preacher or a healer. The man looked desperate. "But you believed," he said. "Please. Just pray the way you did for your son." I didn't know what to say. But as I looked at him, I felt something stir inside me, the same peace that came when the stranger visited. So I placed my hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Lord, as you healed Daniel, please heal this man's child. Let your will be done." Tears ran down the man's face. "Amen," he said softly before leaving. Over the next few days, more people came. Some brought sick children, others came with broken hearts and hopelessness. I prayed with each of them, never pretending to have power, only trusting the God who had shown mercy to us. It wasn't long before a small group began to gather outside our home every evening. We'd sit together, share testimonies, sing softly, and pray. It became something beautiful, a light in a quiet town that once had no hope. But amid all the joy, I couldn't stop thinking about the stranger who had prayed for Daniel. Who was he? Where had he gone? Why did he come to our small town that day and leave without a word? I asked the townspeople, but no one remembered seeing him except me and Miriam. The local innkeeper swore no one of his description stayed there. The market women said they'd seen no foreign visitor. It was as if he had appeared from nowhere, and vanished the same way. Sometimes, when I lay awake at night, I would remember his words, "Faith doesn't make sense to those who only see with their eyes. It's for those who can still believe when everything looks lost." I realized then that maybe I wasn't meant to find him again. Maybe he came only to do what God sent him for, to restore faith where it had died. Months passed, and Daniel grew stronger every day. He joined the local football club, ran freely, and smiled like a boy who had been given a second chance at life. Our home, once filled with sorrow, became a place of laughter, prayer, and hope. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Miriam turned to me and said, "Eli, I think the miracle wasn't just for Daniel." I looked at her curiously. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "It was for everyone who has heard his story. God didn't just heal our son. He reminded us, and everyone around us, that he still works miracles." I nodded slowly, feeling the truth of her words. Daniel wasn't just our son anymore. His healing had become a message, a reminder that no matter how dark things become, faith can bring light again. And deep down, I knew, somewhere out there, the stranger was smiling too. It had been almost a year since Daniel's healing, and our lives had returned to something close to normal, though, in truth, nothing would ever be the same again. Every morning, I woke up with gratitude. Every evening, I watched Daniel play outside, his laughter echoing through the street, and I would whisper a quiet, "Thank you," to God. But one morning, something strange happened. A postman stopped by our small house, which was rare because letters hardly ever came to our town, especially for people like me. He handed me an envelope. It was made of thick, fine paper, sealed with a faint golden mark in the shape of a cross. For Eli, it said in bold handwriting. There was no return address, no stamp, just my name. I stood there for a moment, confused. Miriam came out and asked, "Who is it from?" "I don't know," I said. My hands were shaking slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter written in simple, careful handwriting. Eli. The light of faith shines brightest where darkness once ruled. Do not question what happened, for it was never chance. The boy's healing was a message, for you, for your family, and for those who doubt that God still walks among men. Continue to pray for others. Continue to believe. The servant. That was all. No name. No address. No explanation. Just, the servant. Miriam covered her mouth with her hands. Do you think it's him? I nodded slowly, my chest tightening. It has to be. For a long moment, we stood there in silence, reading the words again and again. The handwriting was steady, the same style as the notes I'd seen the stranger write in the small book he carried that day in the town square. I didn't know how he'd found us again or who delivered the letter. But somehow, deep down, I knew he was still out there, continuing his journey, healing, praying, and reminding people that faith is not a story from the past but a living force that still moves mountains. That evening, I gathered the small prayer group outside our house. By now, there were nearly 50 people, men, women, even children. Some came from other towns just to join us. I told them about the letter, and as I read it aloud, I could feel something powerful fill the air. The servant said we should continue to pray and believe, I told them. He said the light of faith shines brightest where darkness once ruled. That means our faith must never stop, no matter what happens. People began to cry quietly. Others lifted their hands to heaven. It was a simple gathering, but that night, it felt like heaven itself was among us. Later, after everyone left, Daniel sat beside me. He looked thoughtful and said, "Papa, do you think the man who prayed for me will ever come back?" I smiled and ran my hand through his hair. "Maybe not, my son. But he doesn't need to. He already left something behind." "What?" Daniel asked. "Faith," I said softly. "The kind that never dies." Days turned into weeks, and the letter remained on our table, framed in glass. Visitors came just to read it. Some cried when they did. Others said they could feel warmth when they touched the glass. I didn't know what to make of all that, I just knew the message inside was true. One night, I had a dream. I was standing in a field covered in golden light. And there, a few steps away, stood the stranger, wearing the same white robe, his face calm and kind. He didn't speak, but I heard his voice inside me saying, "Eli, keep believing." I woke up trembling, tears in my eyes. Miriam held my hand and whispered, "What did you see?" I looked at her and said, "I saw him." He was smiling. From that day, I understood something deeply: miracles don't end when the moment passes. They continue in the hearts of those who believe. And every time someone hears our story, another seed of faith is planted somewhere in the world. So I keep telling it, at the market, in the fields, at the clinic where I work. Because maybe, somewhere, someone needs to hear that God still walks among us. And maybe that's why the servant came to us in the first place. As the years passed, Daniel grew taller, stronger, and wiser beyond his age. Every time I looked at him, I was reminded of the miracle that had changed our lives. His laughter still filled our home, and every morning, he'd run down the small dusty road to help Miriam with errands or join me at the little clinic where I worked as an assistant. People in the village never stopped talking about what happened to him. The boy who came back from death, they called him. Sometimes, strangers would walk long distances just to see him, to look into the eyes of the child who was once dying but now lived. But as Daniel turned 15, something unusual began to happen. It started one evening when an old woman came to our home. She was bent with age, her back curved like a bow, and her right leg was badly swollen. Her name was Leora, a widow who lived at the far end of our town. She said she'd heard of my son and asked if she could just see him, to feel his hand, even for a moment. I was hesitant. I didn't want people to treat Daniel like a prophet or healer, he was still just a boy. But something in her voice moved me, so I called him out. Daniel came quietly, holding a small bowl of water he'd been using to wash the dishes. "Come, my child," Leora said, tears glistening in her eyes. "I only ask for a touch." Daniel looked at her, puzzled. "I'm not sure what you mean, grandmother," he said softly. "Just your hand," she whispered. So he placed his hand gently on her swollen leg, not in prayer, just in compassion. I stood there, watching. The sun was setting behind him, its orange glow bathing his face in a warm light. Then, something happened. The old woman gasped. She straightened up suddenly and looked down at her leg. It's gone, she cried. What? I asked, rushing forward. The pain. The swelling, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. It's gone. Praise be to God. Daniel stepped back, wide-eyed. Papa. I didn't do anything, he said, his voice trembling. I was speechless. I examined her leg myself, the swelling had truly vanished. The skin that was once dark and tight was now smooth. Leora kept thanking God, her voice echoing across the small courtyard. From that day onward, everything changed again. People started coming to our house not just to hear our story, but to ask Daniel to pray for them. Some brought food, others brought nothing but tears and hope. At first, I tried to stop it. I told them, he's just a child. He's not a healer. But deep down, I remembered the night God healed him. I remembered the servant's words, continue to believe. Maybe, I thought, this was part of the plan all along. One evening, as I watched Daniel pray over a sick man, I felt something stirring in my heart. His voice was calm, gentle, full of peace. It wasn't the voice of a boy anymore, it was the voice of someone who had seen heaven. When he finished, he turned to me and said, Papa, I don't think God healed me just to save me. I think he healed me so I could help others believe. I felt my throat tighten. You're right, my son, I whispered. You're right. That night, after everyone had gone home, we sat by the fire. Daniel looked up at the stars and said, Do you ever wonder where the servant is now? I smiled faintly. No, Daniel. I think he's where he needs to be, reminding another father that God still performs miracles. He nodded quietly, staring at the flames. The stars above us seemed to flicker brighter that night, and as I watched him, I realized something incredible. The same God who healed my son was now using him to heal others. It was no longer just my story. It was our story, a living testimony that faith, once ignited, can pass from one heart to another like a flame that never dies. And as I sat there beside my son, listening to the crackle of the fire and the faint whispers of prayer from nearby homes, I felt at peace. For the first time in many years, I knew our journey was far from over. God wasn't done with Daniel yet.